This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin Incorporated, your one-stop shop for everything standardized patient and wearable simulator.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simulation Nation. Today, we are going to be talking about recruiting standardized patients, the different programs you can have, where to find standardized patients, and then how to onboard them. This is a topic we hear that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. Around the world, I think a lot of people just struggle with how to find standardized patients and then how to know if they are a good standardized patient and they're worth bringing on and things like that. And I think there's a lot of techniques that come from theater that a lot of healthcare simulation is unaware of or does not include. And there's a lot of tips and tricks that can come from theater because obviously they've been doing this for a very long time. But I think a lot of times we don't necessarily go to them for those tips and tricks when it comes to standardized patients.
Yeah, and I think they just have some really incredible tools in their tool belt. It's kind of the time-tested, down to standards of best practice that everybody has employed. Mm-hmm. So we can definitely apply that. I think that that's one of the big benefits to the program that we started is that theater was involved. So mm-hmm. we can share with them the things that we learned and then mm-hmm. hopefully help them along the way.
Yeah, and there is some really great crossover between people from the theater world that want to come over into healthcare simulation, right? There's a lot of people who will see it as a benefit. I know that there are a lot of people that are associated with ASPE and that they have a lot of background in theater and things along those lines. But I think that sometimes those tips and tricks get lost in maybe one institution. And it's like maybe one institution has that and they're using it, but it doesn't really get out to the masses. And I don't know why, but I just feel like maybe it's viewed as like, oh, that works here, or, things are going great here. But I just feel like often we'll find pockets, like we'll find one or two places like, yeah, we do it this way and it's going great for us. But then it usually isn't beyond that. It's not shared beyond that. It's kind of kept in these silos.
And I think it's one of those things where people that are instituting things that are from that theatrical, foundation, they, like you said, they don't realize that other people are hungry for, what they could do or what other things they could do to improve the program. And so they don't necessarily share it. Like you said, it's kind of like they're like, this is what works. I remember when I first started the SP program, my head was down for a good solid 3 years trying to get that program up and running. And then when I had time to take a breath, the idea was, I got to tell other people about this really cool thing that we're doing. So it took some time. Yeah. And I think, the busyness of academia just keeps people from necessarily sharing, and people in the simulation world are not necessarily always PhDs. So mm-hmm. that drive to publish or perish or present or perish mm-hmm. Isn't necessarily there. But I will say that if you can get support from your leadership for some workload to be attributed to that, it really does build the community.
So let's talk about the different programs, because there are a lot of different programs, but typically they're going to boil down to a volunteer program where you are bringing in members of the community, friends, things along those lines to come in and volunteer as your standardized patients. There's also the paid programs where you actually have budget and are paying hourly for your standardized patients. Some people will partner with medical schools and things along those lines and pay to include their standardized patients in their programs. And then the more unique option, but it is gaining popularity, is having a 3-credit course at your university, or it doesn't have to be 3 credits, but 1 credit, some sort of 4-credit course at a university or community college that is then bringing in acting students or different students around campus to come in and play the role of the standardized patient. And they aren't compensated with necessarily $20 an hour, but they are compensated with course credit for participating.
Yeah.
So really, I think that there's a lot of different pros and cons, and I don't want to get too far into the concept of using faculty as standardized patients, because I think that that's a whole nother topic or area to discuss, and it is very separate. If you are going to use faculty and other students inside of simulation, I think that that comes with a very different angle and lens and perspective. But the concept
that's a whole nother podcast, honestly.
Yeah, but the concept of bringing in volunteers or having a paid program or using other students, because there is stake in the game for them of why they're involved, right? So it may be that they want to give back for volunteer. They may be looking for a job for paid. And then for students, they need the course credit to graduate, right? So looking at it in terms of motive across the board with those three programs, you can see that there's motive from the standardized patients angle.
Yeah, and one of the things that I will say as far as the recruiting process, I think by and large, once you have found your core group of SPs, they love it so much, regardless of which way you choose.
Yeah.
They love it so much,
and
they'll
a core
come back.
would be around like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Like that's really what you're looking for, is a 5 or 6
to get started.
Yeah, but if you can get 5 or 6 that are bought in and are like, this is amazing, they will find other standardized patients.
They'll help you for sure.
And so finding those 5 or 6 solid people who really love it, that's going to be your jumping off point. That's what you're going to be working towards in the beginning, is to find those core 5 people that really are going to love it and enjoy it and make your life easier. And I think that's something that gets lost a lot of times, that standardized patients should be there to make your life easier. They should be there to make your life easier. And if they are not, they are probably not the right fit. So looking at the programs from volunteer, paid, and course credit, right? When you're doing that, there's all different ways of who you're looking for depending on the program that you're starting with. It's fairly easy to determine what program you can start, because do you have money is going to be, can you start a paid program? If you have no money and you have no budget, you can't go forward with a paid program.
Well, the one thing I will say about that to consider, if you don't have money or budget, is the federal work study program. So if you are part of a non-for-profit institution, they have something called federal work study at, I think, at every institution, and that's where disadvantaged students or students that have lower incomes can work, and you're paying them minimum wage or maybe a little better than minimum wage, but out of your budget is only 25% of their hourly wage. And then the rest of the 75% is handled by the federal government. So it's a way you can schedule them just like it would be work. But again, they're college students, so there's give and take to it. Yeah. But that is the one thing I will say, is if you have at least a small, teeny amount of budget that could potentially, $2 or $3 an hour could potentially be put aside, that is one option that is lower cost.
And know that when you're starting, it's going to be harder for you to get budget. When you just have an idea or a concept and then going to your dean or director for budget with just an idea, they're not going to buy in right away. Well, you may be lucky, that might be great. But for the most part, they're not going to just buy in with the concept of, oh, okay, let's set aside X amount of money for your budget for your hourly rate. Now,
one thing I'll add to that is if you have a graduate nursing program, an NP program, a PA program, or your medicine, those are almost assumed that they will all have SPs just because of the nature of the way that they are tested and accredited. But the undergraduate programs are likely not, or if it's like a physical therapy program or something like that, because it's just not necessarily automatically assumed that you will have that budget for sure.
So moving forward with how do you actually then get started would be to start with a volunteer program, or starting with a few people who are willing to jump in and be a part of it.
Yeah.
So looking at the volunteer program, where you're going to want to start looking for standardized patients is in any type of local community groups. So looking at if you have church groups, if you have a theater groups in the area community that put on local theater. Again, usually you're going to have 3 or 4 that are either going to be state, region, associated with a certain theater in town, things like that. But being able to really hone in on those groups, you need to find a champion though, because if you reach out to the local theater groups and they're kind of like, sure, we'll just let people know what you're doing, and really don't give you much time or energy to understand what it is, probably move on. They're probably not or again, try to meet up with them, have coffee with them to really explain what it is, have them come and watch a simulation so you can show them, this is what I'm trying to replace as a manikin. I'm trying to bring people in, but you need someone who's going to champion you in that world, because the same concept is if you had someone coming in from the outside that wanted to bring nursing students in for something, right? You're, as the instructor, as someone who's familiar with it, are going to be able to explain it, talk about it, get them excited about it so much better than someone who's from the outside who doesn't understand nursing. It's the same concept with theater. If you want theater people to get excited and see the benefits, you need a fellow theater person who can speak that language to be able to understand it at a high level and be able to communicate that to the students that are doing it.
Yeah, and one of the things that my theater faculty would always talk about, because, you know, when you think about it, okay, so what's in it for the community theater, people that are involved in community theater? And the first thing I want to say about community theater is they volunteer hours and hours and hours of their time for dress rehearsal and performance in community theater.
Set design and
everything. My youngest daughter just did a community theater piece, and she would go to rehearsal, I think it was 3 nights a week, and then
till 10 p.m.
Yeah, from like 6 to 10 p.m., 3 nights a week for probably 6 or 7 weeks. And then the last week, it was every single night. And she was not a main character or a main role, but they commit that they're going to spend that time. So volunteerism is a part of what they do. So that's embedded in them. The other aspect that is benefit for them is the opportunity for improvisational work. So, you know, if they are an aspiring actor or if they just enjoy that aspect, most people love the idea of giving back, especially in healthcare. But they also are going to learn skills of improvisation, because you just never know how the learners are going to interact with the SP. So they've got to be able to, they know who their character is. And I remember doing the simulations for the first few years, and one of the early theater minors that did our first simulations, he said, it's as if I have the script, but nobody else in the play does. And it's that kind of idea that he had to be able to, he knew who he was, but he had to be able to improvise based off of what was happening within the simulation. And I think that builds and hones amazing skills. But he would say it's 360 degrees improvisation. So typically if you're doing improvisation, you're on a stage and, you know, it's 180 degrees, but this is all around you where, you know, you have a simulation going on. And so people are looking to add that skill to their repertoire, or even just to build while at the same time giving back.
Yeah. The other component there too for the volunteer perspective is gaining resume experience. It is not easy to gain resume experience when you're new into theater and you're just trying to kind of get your start in different areas. Again, there's only so many avenues you can go through. But when you are doing simulation, being able to add that to your resume and kind of work different areas, that's going to add to what you can talk about. It also sets you apart from other people because it's a unique thing that's on your resume that you can talk about. And for younger actors who are looking to go to Chicago, New York, LA, all these different places, there are a lot of big deal hospitals, a lot of big deal med schools where they can go around and then they can work. So if they have experience already volunteering at some of these smaller universities, community colleges, whatever it is, if they already have that on their resume and can walk in the door with that, they're going to be seen a lot more, you know, because it's so niche, they're going to be seen as a leg up from other standardized patients who are coming in and wanting to try it out for the first time. And then that's a great way for them to be able to make money while they are going to auditions and things like that in New York and in these big cities.
Yeah. So, and we offered them a certificate of completion. So it was something to add to their resume. I think you could also offer them a letter of reference, you know, to speak to their ability to, you know, be coached and, you know, all of those other things. So again, there's great benefit for that, you know, the paid opportunity down the road. And we also know that even, you know, if they are younger and aspiring to something, that there is tons of opportunity for standardized patient educators if they were to continue to love this and want to do it as a full-time profession. So there's a lot of that. But I also want to speak to the international community because I think it's really important to talk about the idea that there's a lot of, even within the United States, there's a lot of volunteer requirements for young people at universities or before they go to universities. So there may be a volunteer program where this could be their service learning experience, because that is a great opportunity. And the other thing that we heard about that a lot of people do is if there's an assisted living, or not assisted living, but independent living area for the geriatric population, there may be people there that want to volunteer and maybe they're close enough. And I know one particular program, they would send a bus to go pick them up and then bring them onto campus, so they didn't even have to worry about driving. So there is that opportunity as well if you have like an independent living facility close to you, or 55 and older community that might be interested in doing that.
Yeah, and I think that that's the more common route, is when people think of standardized patients, they often think of people who are retired, they often think of people who are looking for things to keep them occupied. And I think that the key there is that don't go into one area and just say, okay, this is my solution, because then you're left with only SPs of one demographic, one pool, and you don't have that ability to really change up what you're doing. But if you can approach younger people and have it with the mindset of you're coming in to gain experience, this will be a resume builder, this is a way for you to hone your craft, but then you also look at the retirement community and say, okay, this is a way to bring you guys in. These are the appropriate simulations that you're going to be a part of. I think that that's also appropriate. But it's all about having that diverse pool. And I think sometimes people can find one area and it's like, oh, this works great, I'm going to stay here. But then what happens is that then they limit themselves, and that there's not really a way of getting out and
right. Or if
that.
something happens and that doesn't work out down the road, then you're limited. So yeah, put many eggs in different baskets.
Yeah. My other recommendation, as you're looking for volunteers and building your program, have a business card. Have something that you can hand to people, a pamphlet that has information, pretty much anywhere and everywhere. Like, you can find people who might be a great fit in the grocery store. It could be your neighbors. It could be anyone, and almost be open to the fact that anyone might be the right person. My other little tidbit of advice that I always say when I do consulting, make an email that is not your own email. If you're going to start putting your email on flyers and putting them out in random places, do not put your work email on that. Create a standardized patient program at whatever it is.
Good point.
So that you can filter through all of the junk you're going to get. Just be aware of that. Don't start off, because you will start getting crazy stuff. So come up with a generic email before you start putting it out there, but work and get some literature. Get a handout to explain it, have someone who's theater look it over, and then basically spread that far and wide. Put it on community boards, put it online. Again, thinking about putting like just a pamphlet like PDF onto Facebook groups and things like that. Spread it far and wide as much as you can. You'll never know what you get back. That concept of doing more of that cold spread, you're going to get less in return, but it's less work. It's kind of like you're just putting it out everywhere and you see what you get back. But there's a lot of local theater community groups. There's a lot of just theater groups on Facebook with being able to put it out and say, is anyone interested in this? Send it to anyone you know.
Invite them to come and see a simulation. Help them, let them come and observe, and show them where the limitations are, or the things that you're struggling with, or the things that you want to accomplish. I think that brings it to life pretty quickly, you know.
But so looking at that, especially when you don't have the money as an incentive, being able to look at kind of what they're going to be a part of and what they're going to be giving back to and things like that really help. Now looking at the paid programs, typically with that, I would not recommend just putting that out everywhere and everywhere. I would say be a little bit more tight-fisted with what you're looking at. Like, don't go on Craigslist and put that on Craigslist.
Yeah, no.
Things like along those lines, like you
want to be antiquated very soon.
You want to be tighter with it. So when you're looking for the paid programs, again, go to, if you have a theater department at your institution, even if they're not close or you may not be able to partner with them, they have the connections you need. They know where you would. So if you were to say, hey, this is the position I'm looking for, I'm trying to get this into theater groups, they will be able to help you. Even if you just have, kind of like a friend's daughter who is in theater, being like, hey, where are places that you look for positions? Where are things that you look at?
There's websites.
Put it out there on different areas that they know about. LinkedIn is another great opportunity of being able to find people who are looking for positions in theater or want to be involved in theater. But my recommendation is just kind of like all the things we talked about with volunteer still applies to paid, but I'd say just be a little more tight-fisted with it. Don't put it out everywhere and everywhere, because especially when you're offering slightly above minimum wage, which is what standardized patients require.
Hopefully that gets better.
Yeah, and they require that. You're going to not want to put this just anywhere and everywhere, because you are going to get a much higher rate of return, but then you're going to be spending a lot of time sifting through resumes, interviews, auditions, and things like that. So just be a little, when it's paid, be a little more tight-fisted. Volunteer, I'd say kind of spread the word anywhere and everywhere to see what you get. Then when it comes to having a course, the great part with that is that you already have a built-in program or an audience of who you can reach out to. So being able to put it out on, just your general courses and things like that where students can apply to be a part of the course. You want to have a theater partner or want to be closely involved with your theater partner. And then also looking at adult students, I think that that's another big one. Is I would really encourage anyone who's doing that to make sure that they have good inroads and good communication with them. The other thing that I think is really important is that you are doing your best to explain this course to advisors. So getting in front of a lot of advisors so that they understand what this course is rather than just being a description, like a little paragraph. But you as the person running the course being able to describe it to them, make sure they really understand what it's going to be, what the expectations are going to be, is going to increase your enrollment and is going to increase people being excited and wanting to know more about it.
Yeah, and I would say that you don't have to start big. If you just have 1 or 2 students that sign up, the way that we positioned it was it started as an independent study course, and it was geared towards theater minors. So obviously that's kind of easier because I had a theater partner that recruited them. But as we started to grow, it got bigger. And that getting bigger was the fact that we now had to reach out to advisors. So we created a 1-pager that we sent out to the advisors, and it was slow trickling in. We didn't get a lot of buy-in initially, but we maybe have 6 or 7 students, and we moved it from an independent study to a developmental course. Like we were just kind of getting the curriculum developed and figuring out what it was that we needed. But as we started to get some traction, getting testimonials from the students, so asking the students, can we share this with other advisors so they could read the impact that it had on the student, that motivated other people.
Yeah.
And it was
just adding that fuel to the fire, just building it and building it.
What's in it for them, right? And so for us, because it was an elective, it fulfilled a type A requirement, which was like the health or the humanities requirement that all students had. It also fulfilled a discovery learning credit. So how does it benefit them? They're going to get these, check these boxes, right? And if that's not the case, if it's something else, it's also, I've seen other programs have it as an internship. So internships are pretty much at every community college, every university. So do you have an internship option within you're already built into your courses, and can you take this opportunity as an internship either for theater students or for health profession students or whatever the case may be, but they're still getting course credit. It's just that it's already plugged into a course and you don't have to start all over. I had no idea that was an option when we started, and we really started from the ground up. And I'm thankful now that we did it, but there is a way to kind of jump into it faster if if there's already a course approved within your institution.
Yeah, and the only thing that I will say is just make sure that whatever course you're going to be plugging it into, it's the right fit.
Sure.
Because I have had people in the past where they'll say, oh, we plugged it into 352 theater or whatever, and then they're like, yeah, we get less than 3 hours of simulation because it's only part of that course. And then it's like, well, that's not even worth you training them if you're going to get 3 hours of sim at the end of, like, you know what I mean? It's like, that's not worth your time. So working through that component, I think, is also important, is that, like, yes, that may be the easier option, and it may be the best place to start to, like, get some feet under you, figure it out. But just long term, understand that always just having it plugged in, if it's not meeting your needs, you need to think beyond that, because sometimes the juice
or
isn't
to start
worth
off
the
with a
squeeze.
bang and then the instructor isn't great at even if there are more hours. I would say you would have to have at least 15 hours
at least to make it worth
yeah.
Okay, so everything that we've talked about so far, I term as going fishing, putting out all of your lines, getting the nets out there, getting as much as you can to get attention back. And at that point, that's where you're going to be able to see how effective were you at getting the word out of what you needed to do. I recommend that people start recruiting the semester before. If you don't work inside of semesters, then usually 3 or 4 months before you're trying to start hiring or actually looking at bringing people in to start simulation. So some people who, maybe hospital-based and things along those lines, it's twice a year that they do that, and they just have different times that they coin. Those that work inside of universities and community colleges, typically that's going to be for that upcoming fall or spring semester that you have. You might diversify into summer and winter as well, but for general purposes, you're looking at twice a year. At this point, regardless of how you are gaining your applicants who are interested, that is how it needs to be approached, is an applicant that is interested versus someone who's here to help me. Thank you so much for saying yes and
you know how
wanting
she
to help
knows
me.
That because that's the way I was when I started.
Well,
right?
that it was. I mean, because it was how it began, was just a warm body that wants to be a part of this. Yes, we love you. Thank you for helping. You're amazing. Come on in. And that just led to so many other headaches. And it wasn't until me, as someone who came through as a standardized patient and then became the standardized patient educator, that went, this is awesome, and we need to stop just accepting everybody and everybody all the time and like just being like, thank you so much for showing up. We need to approach this from a standpoint of, this is an honor to be a part of this. This is a exclusive group that, you know, does this, and you are being accepted into that group, and because of that, there are certain expectations that come along with that. And I think that often inside of paid programs, that's much more common. You know, that's a much more common culture of like, you're here to do a job, we're going to pay you. This is how that transaction works. But I do think that for volunteer programs and course credit, often that gets lost in terms of there's still expectations, there's still requirements. You can't just come in whenever you want to come in and then not show up other times. That has to be certain expectations. So how we approached it was viewing it as an application process. For you to show interest, you were coming in as an applicant, and we were going to schedule an interview and an audition. And I would recommend, if you are able to, separate those two things out. Do an interview and then do an audition. For us, we didn't have the time to do two separate things and come back differently. So we just blended it all together, where they did a 15-minute interview and then a 15-minute audition, and we just scheduled them for a 30-minute block.
Yeah. And I'll just say that everything that she's sharing is just saving you from a ton of heartache the next semester.
Yes.
So it's work, and you
is.
have to block the time. One other pro tip I would give to this is, when in the beginning, we would do it at the end of the semester because that's when I had time to breathe. But if people have already selected their courses, it's hard to get them to come back if you're doing for course credit. So do your interviews and auditions before they actually select their courses. We did it the week before they selected their courses for the next semester, because then we could have conversations with them about their schedule.
Yeah.
And if their schedules were too busy in the interview, we would find that out.
Yeah.
We'll get to that in a minute. But again, when you're scheduling these interviews and auditions, do it before they're signing up for courses, if it is for course credit.
Yeah, and so with that specifically for the course credit, we didn't have it where students could just sign up for the course. It would say, if you're interested in this course, contact so-and-so. Because again, we didn't, they couldn't just add it on. And so because of that, then they would contact us, and then we would say, oh, there's an interview process. Let's set you up with a 30-minute interview.
Yeah, and I will say with that is something that we brought over from theater. Like I would never really honestly have thought of it.
Yeah.
But because they always did auditions, and in the beginning that's what it started with, is just an audition, not the interview part was really important later.
Professional.
But that was definitely a pro tip that theater brought with them that really made a difference.
Well, and I feel like whenever I talk to people about interviews and auditions, their eyes get like saucers, and it's like, what do you mean? I don't know how to do that. I have no idea what you mean when you say that. So going into kind of the nitty gritty, we'll talk about these details because everyone's capable of doing it. It's just that you need to know these tips and tricks. And I think sometimes theater comes in like, yeah, duh, you just do an audition. But people who haven't run auditions in the past are like, I don't even know where to begin when it comes to doing that.
Right. And it's super easy, super simple. We have pro tip helps for you for this too.
Yeah. So looking at it, scheduling those 30-minute blocks, we usually would block off an afternoon or a day, and we would have our standardized patient educator, we would have our theater partner, and then you as the nursing representative there. And then when we were first starting, before we really had that standardized patient educator, we would bring in people who were already a part of it. So if we had people who had already done it for a semester or two, they would come in and they would help with the interview part usually, to be able to just kind of explain it, get people excited, then be able to talk about what brought them in. And that was also very helpful to have other people there.
Or even explaining it, what's different about this than what you normally are doing, right?
Yeah. And I think being able to have it's easier once you have those 5 people under your belt. I think when you're getting started, you're still just figuring out what's going to work for you best. But once you have those 5 people, it makes it a little easier to get more of a formalized process. So bringing them in, we would often start with the interview portion. And the interview portion really was just discussing what their background was, what they were interested in. So if they were a college student, what's your major? If they were a professional, what do you do for work? The next component was always discussing what their schedule looked like. This is the biggest piece of advice that I can offer to anybody. If their schedule looks like they are busy from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every weekday, that probably is not going to work for how you run simulations. For us, we ran sims Monday through Friday, sometimes Saturday, but Monday through Friday, typically from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. That was our typical normal calendar. Now, again, there was some evening ones and some variation there, but the bulk of our sims would happen on those days. If someone works a 9 to 5, they are not going to be able to come in from sims from 9 to 5. It's just not going to work. So being aware of that and addressing that up front in the interview, because there's no point in sending them through all the training, because then by the time you're ready to put them into sim, they're not available. They're just not going to be available. With college students, if they would come in and they would have courses that were huge blocks all in the middle of the day, from 9 a.m. till 10:30, and then from 11 to 1, and then from 1:30 to 3:30, again, I'm limited. I might be able to get you in a little bit in the afternoon, but there's not much I can do with that. Also, research was a big thing. If people were involved in research, that took up days and days of them volunteering at labs.
So a lot of our students that were enrolled were pre-med students. So they either had to go and do research to build their resume for pre-med, or they would go and be a scribe at the hospital or something along those lines. So we needed to find that out and have a conversation about whether this was the semester for them to be enrolled in the course.
Or internships were another big one where that took up a huge chunk of time. But all of these things that are great, that are typically like you look at it and you're like, wow, you're such a well-rounded student. You're involved in internships. You're doing research. You have all these course credits. Like, that's amazing. But for us, it was like, that's amazing. That's not going to work for us. Let us know when you have a less busy semester. Or again, for people who wanted to be involved, and let's say they worked a 9 to 5, it could be, this might be a great opportunity for like these hand-plucked situations in terms of, oh, we have an evening sim, we can bring you in from, 7 to 9 or something like that, if that would work for you. But it's just being very honest. And I think sometimes in sim, we avoid having that hard conversation in the interview process because we just want everyone to be excited and we feel like we can't turn anyone away. But what ends up happening is you spend so much time spinning your wheels trying to get these people involved, and it just doesn't go anywhere. It just doesn't help.
And you spend a lot of effort getting them trained, and then it just drops.
They can fulfill an hour or 2 hours, and that's about it. The other component that you're going to want to talk about is, what is their motivation for wanting to be involved? This is a big one in terms of volunteers, especially like we talked about earlier, when you're just spreading the word far and wide of wanting to have everyone involved. You don't want to bring in people who have their own noxious experiences with healthcare. If they tell you that they're here because they want to help fix healthcare providers, or if you talk about why do you want to be involved, and they go into a very long story about how they were mistreated or how they want to show people empathy and things like that, that's not going to be the right fit. 9 out of 10 times, that's not going to be the right fit, because you don't want it to be that they come into simulation with the mindset of, I'm the educator and I went through this experience, and so now I need to share this with everybody else, going through nursing school or going through med school or whatever it is. You want people to come in, and they may have noxious experiences or gone through a very hard time in healthcare, but if their terminology is in terms of, I want to fix them, I want to be the person to share, like, that's where that alarm bell should be ringing.
You want to just make sure that their motivations are altruistic. I think that at the end of it, that's the important piece of this, is that, their motivations to do this is to help the learners, because no matter what, even if you have graduate nursing programs and they have experience as nurses, when they step into the shoes of an NP, they're still going to trip over their words and they're still going to make mistakes. And so if the goal is to help them be better and do better and be more confident and grow, then that's that's what that's what you're looking for. That's what you're hoping for. Because if, just think about if one student makes a mistake that is unempathetic, or, makes a comment, again, not, asking the why question to somebody with mental health problems or something like that, that's going to evoke a much stronger reaction from somebody who's coming at this with already a defense mechanism or an intent to fix healthcare.
Yeah, to find the problem. That's what you don't want. But anything in terms of wanting to give back, anything of wanting to help people grow, again, like, I don't have much going on. I want this to be a way of getting out of the house. All of that, ding, 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 great answer. Yes. That's what you want. Like, those are great answers. That's what you're looking for. And that's who you can find. In this episode, we're going to be sharing with you guys a resource on all the interview questions that we typically ask throughout a semester of bringing on standardized patients. That will be in the comments section if you guys want to download that. There's a few other nuances that we get into, but overarching, what we're looking for is, what does your availability look like? And are there any red flags in terms of?
Well, I think the other big one is, how did you hear about us, or how did you hear about the class? Because if you have another SP and they're like, oh, Tom, was talking to me, then typically you'll know that they've explained a little bit about the requirements.
You can also understand professionalism based off of that usually. Yeah. All right. And then going into the audition portion. So once they would complete the interview, we'd get to know them a little bit better. We would then hand them over and they would go into the audition process. In the audition process, they would act out 3 different roles with strong emotions. My biggest recommendation for any of the scenarios that you want to do is do not include mental health in your audition portion.
Absolutely not.
People don't understand it. There's a lot of misconceptions, and you're not going to see the range you're looking for because they are doing their best off of stereotypes, but they have no idea what it's actually like. So doing emotions like anger, doing emotions like sadness, doing emotions like pain, things like that are what you're looking for. So that's going to give you that range, but don't go too deep into any type of diagnoses or what you're looking for. Like, again, I can remember someone telling me that they had multiple personality disorder, and they'd be like, I can't bring people on that don't really understand. It's like, but your job is to explain what multiple personality disorder is. It's not them coming in and already being an expert on that and knowing how to portray that. There's no way that they're going to be able to, like, just watch YouTube videos and
they did an audition and the person was to be.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think what I was thinking when you were talking about it in the beginning is make it something relatable. Like, they broke their arm. Yeah. When you think about pain, not that they have appendicitis and they're in the hospital, because a lot of people haven't been hospitalized.
Yeah, or that they've always had this pain their entire, like, they have chronic pain and they've had this for
just make it
25 years.
Completely that they could potentially plug into as far as a relatable, we did one of grief and loss, and they were just being told that their child had passed. And though many of our auditionees were not parents, they had seen had the emotion of grief and loss somewhere in their life. So just think about relatable emotions, but not necessarily like hardcore healthcare.
Yeah. And anything that's going to be too hard, like, again, like a Parkinson's or something that's just a very hard to relate to situation. But being able to have scenarios that are going to be relatable. Again, it's the same way we want them to want the students to do well. You want your auditionees to do well as well. So you want to give them things that they're going to be able to excel at. You're not trying to get that trick. So bringing them in, being able to go through the audition, what you're really looking for there, and these aren't necessarily like deal breakers, like end it, thank them, and walk away, but they are things to look for, is playing to the audience, which we always refer to as the person who's coming in who's looking for the laugh, or they're looking for the big reaction, because they're used to being on stage. They're used to, that is what they perform for. They perform for the applause, they perform for the laugh, they perform for the reaction. That's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it is something you're going to have to be aware of during their training process and watching them start out in simulation, is that if they are someone who plays to the audience, that needs to be corrected, and you need to work through that. The other one is making choices. So that is a theater term of making choices, where basically if they start sitting, and let's say it's an anger audition, right? Like that they're playing a person who's upset by the situation that's going on, that then they choose to stand up, they choose to pace around the room, they use the area that they have, but they're making a choice rather than just staying seated the entire time and going through the emotions, that they are making choices to go beyond where they started from.
Yeah, and I think the other choice is we would always, in that with the auditions, we didn't give them a big script. We just gave them a couple paragraphs, but
just one paragraph. Yeah, it was just a few sentences.
A simple.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we would do is we would ask the person who broke their arm, how did they break it in the middle of the audition, and that had not been included in the information. So were they able to come up with something quickly over how they broke? Because a person would know how they broke their arm, right? Or did they fumble over those words? So that is another piece where choices came in.
Sometimes you would see it where they could be like, oh, I was on a dirt bike playing with my siblings and, like I hit a tree and I fell off, and you'd get a full story. And then some people would just like, I broke it. I don't know. I just broke it.
Yeah.
So being able to see those differences of how they react and respond when they're asked questions they're not aware of or don't know, that's always helpful. And then the other component that we would always add into the auditions was if it wasn't going well, being able to pause, give them feedback on what we were looking for.
I give them coaching notes.
But being able to say, oh, you're at a 3 right now, anger-wise. I need you at an 8. That was always really helpful to give them that scale of saying, you're here, I need you here. So being able to communicate that. And being able to communicate that was always helpful because you don't want to go through it and be like, well, that was really bad, but then you never gave the opportunity to improve. Because sometimes they just aren't aware of what you're looking for, or they don't have a lot of acting experience. Like you said, a lot of our students were pre-med, or they're just younger coming in and they just don't have a lot of background in it. Yeah. Or they might even have a lot of background in acting, but maybe not improv. Because improv is a whole nother game than doing a scripted play. So being able to give them those coaching notes on what you're looking for, then letting them restart and start again, that was always really helpful. I think to always get the best out of people and be able to see it for what it really was.
Well, and it just spoke to their coachability.
Yeah, exactly. If they were going to be coachable once they were in the scenarios and things like that.
Yeah. So one other thing I want to say that we instituted later on that I thought was really, really helpful, or at least insightful, is asking them to bring a headshot with them to the audition. So the ask, it's not necessarily that we needed the headshot, though it was nice because we had different folders for them
and
all.
Could remember them once we were going through it.
But the headshot, the ask was, did they read their email completely and did they follow directions? Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to accept somebody that forgot their headshot, but we would remind.
It's a note. It's a good note.
But we would remind them, hey, send us an email with your headshot, and if they, followed up on it, okay. Again, it's a note, but it is something just to see how responsible people are. And, it didn't have to be anything fancy, but it was just like, hey, can you bring us a printed headshot?
Yeah.
That was something that later on really helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And having that as kind of one of the first tests was very helpful, going through the interview and audition. And then at the end, we would all come together and we would discuss person by person. And I will say, as you're going through at the end, deciding who gets accepted, we were very lenient. Like, it wasn't as if, like, you are not Juilliard, right? Like, we are accepting a lot of people in here. Even if there are, like, a red flag or two, we're like, okay, we can handle that. The biggest reasons why we wouldn't accept people would be if we felt like they were going to come in and try to fix healthcare providers, or their schedules were not open. Those were the two main things. The other component that I would always look for is someone who I would be comfortable having them interacting with the nursing students or the med students or the physical therapy students. Who is it that I'm like, if I felt like I'm not comfortable putting you in a place of giving feedback or being able to go into that situation and be like, emotionally intelligent through it, that would always be another big red flag for me, as if I felt like they didn't have the emotional intelligence to go in and be able to be professional with these students and interact in a professional setting. That was the only other big thing I would look for.
I would say a couple of times, and this may have been before you joined us, but sometimes people would audition and they were so flat and uncoachable that I did not feel as though it would bring a realistic patient care scenario, and so we didn't accept them. So I think it was only once or twice.
Yeah.
By and large, they try.
Yeah.
If you have someone that is flat, but they're working at it, give them characters. And again, we'll get to this at probably a different podcast, but give them characters that are closely related to who they are versus having them to do psychotic break.
We would do that a lot, where when we would have students who necessarily were coming in, didn't have the confidence, because again, like, you know, when you're grabbing volunteers, like they may be like, I've never done theater before, I have no idea. I would always start them with their first sim that they're going to do is someone who's very close to who they are, right? Like you said, like a mom or a dad or a college student or whoever it might be, a grandparent, you know, whatever.
It didn't require a lot of emotions or a lot of nonverbal, you know,
just similar where it's not as big of a reach for them. They have a lot of things to draw off of, and then depending on how they did with that, it would be like, oh, okay, we can get them to that next level. And I think a lot of times, and this was my favorite part of running the standardized patient program, was seeing people go from the audition, and you'd have like nuggets, and it'd be like, oh, they got something. They don't even know they have it. They don't even know they have this ability, and being able to see that, and then kind of putting them in a few things that might stretch them a little bit, but you know, they're in their safe zone, and then being able to be like, look, you can move up. You can do that next level. You can do that next thing, and really pushing them. I always really enjoyed that because you would have, you know, the ones that like really stand out in my head were usually the pre-med students who had no experience with doing standardized patients, doing simulation, anything. And they'd come in and they were so shy and they felt like this was just like not the right place for them. And then just being able to put them in these situations and watching them grow, and then being able to see how much they've improved over the semester and how much they're able to take on new challenges that they weren't necessarily expecting.
It's just
but
like,
that's always really special.
As an educator, that's just near and dear to your heart. I mean, that's just what, you know, I think of it as like, I would get excited when I would see the nursing students learning, right? But then to see when the theater students were, and that's the beauty of what we did, is that within our program, especially because they were all students, they were learning from, with, and about each other, even outside of the health disciplines. You know, the theater students were learning from the nursing students, and the physical therapy students, and you know, everybody was learning from each other. And I think that's just, again, it's just such a blessed thing from my perspective, because it really highlights the value of the SP program and what it brings to not just the health professions, but even the people that are portraying the SPs. Yeah.
The other thing I just want to highlight as we're wrapping up here is I think the other piece that really is special that happens when you do start to grow your program. So we talked about having those core 5 and, you know, beginning to expand. But as you start to have that diverse pool of standardized patients, one of the things when I look back on the heydays of like, oh, that was when things were really thriving, I think about how much community was had inside of the standardized patient program. And you had students from all different disciplines, as well as we had kind of a hybrid model, which is also what you can do. You don't have to stick to one avenue and say, oh, we only do paid or we only do volunteer. You can have a mix of how this is going to flow. So we really ended up having a volunteer program, a paid program, and a course program by the end of it, because people wanted to stay on, and we'd have to find different ways of how to engage them and what was appropriate. But when we had that kind of all mix of people, we had people from all different backgrounds, all different majors, and all different demographics.
Generations.
Exactly. And I think that was a part that was so cool. And I remember seeing that firsthand, was seeing people who would come in as you know, retirees that just kind of wanted to be able to get out of the house, then being able to involve as, you know, maybe the grandparent or something like that. But we did a few sims of having them as grandparents and having the grandchild in the sim with them. So now they're collaborating in those aspects. We would do ones with siblings.
They love it working together. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we would do siblings in the room together to take care of grandma and who's going to go home with grandma at the end. But being able to see the natural connections that come from that, the natural relationships that occur, I think it was so special because you had so many people who in no other way would these people interact. In no other way would these people be friends or spend time together. Yeah. But because of the nature of simulation, they came together and they were really able to interact. And I think that those were the pieces that really kept people coming back over and over again and wanting to be a part of it. Was there was this community that it was kind of like you went through it all together and you had these bonding experiences of going through sim together and interacting together, and that just really fostered this very positive community. And I don't know, like I couldn't put a pin in how we did it, but I do think that in some ways there is a level of gratitude that you have for these people wanting to come in and be a part of the program. But it is this element of going through the interview and audition, and we always did an improv and having everyone go through the same process.
Yeah, I was going to say, really when we taught them, people. They all, regardless of how they came in, right? Yeah, they all had the same requirements, and they all took the same educational aspects together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so they would do improvisation. Again, that's something that theater brought to this as part of our coursework, was the improvisation piece. But I think the other big thing, and we didn't have it, but I think this is I've heard this from multiple different institutions, is the SP break room is another way to build community.
Yeah.
I think them just having like a
and
break
they will
time,
naturally gravitate towards one another. Like we
Yes.
didn't have, for a long time, we didn't have a break room, quote unquote, but we had like a little room that was kind of off of the sim lab space where we would, as instructors and things like that, that's where we would meet to do dress rehearsals and things like that. That place would naturally gravitate where people would just come to do homework there. People would just come to hang out. People who were coming from the community, they would come an hour early just to kind of spend time with everybody and gain that relationship. And I think being able to have that area or space people can go, because you don't want that in the control room. It's too chaotic. But having that small room, I mean, it really was our break room. We just didn't know it at the time. But being able to foster that, I think, is also very helpful to gain that. And similar to what we were saying earlier, it's like that if you build it, they will come. When you have that sense of community and relationships and positivity that radiates from it, then when you bring someone else in and they get it and they understand it, they're again another lifetime person. Yeah. And just to speak of the power of that, we had one student, Ari August, love her. She went on to med school and she has left me now, but
broke our hearts.
She was around for probably 6 years. I mean, I think she started freshman year and then still remained on into her med school, and then eventually was like, guys, I'm too busy. I can't keep doing it. But she recruited, I think she recruited about 30 to 35 students over those years to come in and be a part of it. And some of those students, again, stayed.
She did her
for additional years to come.
She did a whole, I don't want to say dissertation because she was an undergrad, but a whole project on looking at the outcomes of the theater, healthcare theater program. She built a whole program, or did a whole, not dissertation, but a whole project on looking at the outcomes of standardized patients and how that impacts them. Yeah. And I mean, she presented on it and everything at IMSH, I think. So, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. I think that's the stuff, though, that is, you don't realize it when you're starting out and you don't have anything and you're kind of like, but how? Like, how do I do that? And I think that my advice is just take that first step, start to gather that group of people.
One or two.
If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But when it works, it works. And you'll know and you'll feel it in your gut that this is the right move. And just keep moving in that direction. It doesn't just naturally happen overnight. It takes a lot of work, and then you look up and you're like, oh, we did it. I didn't even realize we did it.
But you always have to be thinking in the beginning, what is the benefit for them? Mm-hmm. How does this benefit for them? And then once you get one or two and you can get testimonials from them, include that in your in what you're talking about. So it's not just you saying how it's benefiting, but people that are SPs are saying how it benefits them.
And one last comment here, because I know we are close on time here, but I think the other piece is I always would focus on what their interests were. So if they wanted to go on to physical therapy, or if they wanted to be involved in some, I would always try to find the things that they were interested in, connect them back in to those simulations. Once I knew what they liked and what they enjoyed, I would always try to get them involved in those sims. And then once they had experience, I'd bring them back in and have them teach other standardized patients those roles.
That really helped with quality control.
Absolutely. And it's just that bottom line that the more you are actually invested in them, invested in their interests, they can feel that and they will respond back with investing in you. And I think that just having that mutual respect and wanting to make each other, happy, I don't know the better way of putting it, I think that it just really fosters that relationship that you're looking for.
And that's definitely like a long-term plan, because in the beginning you only have one sim, so like you can't necessarily plug them into their interests, but as your sim program grows or your SP program grows,
but even knowing what they're up to, like having them come in and being like, oh, how was that exam that you had last week? But building those relationships, I think sometimes it is hard because you already have all your nursing students or your med students, or you're already so dialed in all these other areas. But if you can build those relationships where you know what's going on with them, again, it goes so far. Like, how's your grandkids doing? Did you get to see them last weekend? All of those different pieces. I think that it just makes people feel seen and appreciated, and it creates that culture that you want. Because again, then it's just that two-way street that happens. Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Well, you can tell that we obviously love to talk about this topic.
All
We
things
really
SP.
enjoy all of these conversations and being able to share more about it. We will have the interview questions in the comments. If you guys have a favorite interview question or audition tip, please leave it in the comments for those in the community. And we'll see you next time.